Hello, I'm Shannon Horrocks, and I'm the Grassland trainee for Cumbria Wildlife Trust.
And I'm Claire Cornish. I'm the Grassland Conservation Officer for Cumbria Wildlife Trust.
We wanted to host this online event so that people that aren't able to visit the meadows at Bowber Head currently can all view this online, get a taster for it. Questions you can pop in the chat and we'll look at answering them at the end. And this will be recorded and sent out to everyone that's here today, so you don't need to jot anything down. So yeah, do you have anything to add, Claire, before I begin?
I don't think so. I think that's covered it.
I will share the footage now then.
Hello, I'm Claire.
And I'm Shannon.
Welcome to Bowber Head Farm in Ravenston. Please come with us for a walk through the meadows. This lovely architectural plant is yellow rattle, and it's common in old meadows and grasslands and road verges throughout Britain really. We use it in restoration to suppress some of the grass growth so that other wildflowers can come through. The plant's hemiparasitic. It's only an annual, even though it's put on all this growth. It's hemiparasitic, which means as soon as the seed germinates, puts out a little root, finds an adjacent grass root and starts to feed off the grass. So it doesn't really need many leaves for photosynthesis because a lot of its energy comes from adjacent grasses. Because of that, the grasses nearby are shorter than the surrounding sward. And you can just buy the seed, we can harvest it from other meadows, and it's just a really, really useful tool for us. Because each of these pods, when they're ripe, will be a lovely kind of pale brown, really crispy pod with some big seeds in that rattle when they're ripe, which is why it's called hay rattle. This is rough hawkbit, not that typical species of Upland Hay Meadow, but you do tend to find it on these drier banks where the soil is a bit thinner and a bit drier. And you can see here on this meadow at Bowber Head, it forms a whole swathe along the edge of this meadow, just on the edge of this limestone bank. It's a lovely species, and invertebrates absolutely love it. It's full of pollen for them. This is a limestone bank and it's typical of that habitat. So we've got species here that we won't find in the meadows because they're more restricted to drier, stonier, more calcareous areas. We've got things like bird's-foot trefoil down here, this little yellow one, and also the betony, this lovely carmine coloured flower here. We've also got meadow oak grass, this lovely shiny grass with these long awns, and Bryza quaking grass, this lovely grass with these big spikelets that move in the wind. They're all characteristic of these limestone banks, which we're really lucky to have in Bowber Head, just to add additional habitat interest to the fabulous meadows. One thing we haven't really mentioned is that these are truly upland hay meadows. Here in Bowber Head we're almost at 300 metres and the moorland line runs very close to here, and if you just look across the valley you can see the fell land is on the same level as this, so these are very, very high, these meadows, which is why we get all these species from northern climes, the northern montane species, which also extend up into Norway and Sweden. Part of the ongoing management of Bowber Head will reflect that of traditional hay meadows in the area. The sheep come off in the spring and then the meadows are left like this to grow the flowers, grow the grass, for as many of the species to set seed as possible. And in that way we maintain the flowers and the sward. Some people need to take an earlier hay crop. You can see the field behind us has already been cut. That will be baled and taken away. So that will probably be a much more species poor field. Things won't have had a chance to set seed in there. And nesting birds like curlews and lapwing may not be able to fledge raise a second set of young in a field that's mown earlier. Upland meadows like these are therefore vital for birds, upland waders like curlew, who will feed on the fell, nest in the meadow. It just provides a perfect combination of shelter and food for them. So that's, one of the key reasons why our putting dates are so late. Ruth and Annette are part of our survey team with the Wildlife Trust, and they've been with us for a number of years. We've been restoring meadows since 2008, and we do detailed surveys before the meadows are restored and for quite a few years afterwards, just to check that the species we think we're putting in actually are being introduced into the meadows and are spreading. This is wood cranesbill, one of the iconic species of northern hay meadows. It's only found across Cumbria and Durham and Yorkshire and maybe north parts of Lancashire and up into Scotland. We're really pleased to have it at Bowber Head. It's relatively common but quite scattered across the whole of Ravensdale and Orton and anywhere that's on the limestone in Cumbria. And this is another species that we will be collecting seed from, carefully propagating in the nursery and then planting back out in the meadows.
So this is melancholy thistle, and it has this like spiky purple head, and you can tend to hide it, or I can, because it's got this white back on its leaf. And it's most iconic, I believe, in Upland Hay Meadows in northern England, and it's best propagated from root cuttings or from seed, and our local gardener Julia has taken root cuttings from the melancholy thistle on site and then propagated it back in our nurseries at Plumgoss, and then we've now plug planted these across this field, which is currently under restoration, and we've planted them around the edges because that's where they tend to take best. We hope you've enjoyed this tour through Bowber Head's hay meadows today and learnt a bit about the species you might find in an upland hay meadow.
And if you keep watching, you can follow some explanation of the kind of restoration we'll be doing at Bowber Head and the 2 different methods we'll be using to restore the hay meadows this year.
Now to talk a bit about the history of Bowber Head, and then Claire will follow on with information about how we're restoring the meadows. So just a bit about me and my position. I'm the Grassland Meadow Maker trainee with Cumbria Wildlife Trust. I assist the Cumbria Wildlife Trust Grassland team and Arnside and Silverdale AOMB in the restoration efforts of grassland meadows to the local area. Following the successful Plant Life bid to the Green Recovery Challenge Fund and our partnership with Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, Cumbria Wildlife Trust will help to restore 51 hectares of species-rich grassland through the 2021 and 2022 Meadow Makers project. The countrywide project aims to restore over 500 hectares of species-rich grasslands on more than 100 sites, and will include a nationwide engagement programme hoping to connect 7,000 people in local and wider communities to grassland heritage, improving experiences and well-being. The project also provides funding for a trainee, so me, a meadow maker, which is a 6-month traineeship with Plant Life, working with our project officer, trying to encourage young people into conservation. I'm just one of the 6 meadow maker trainees. The other 5 are dotted around the country. One of the other trainees that I've had the chance to work with is Joe, which you can see in that photo of me and him there. That was us out surveying meadows. Joe is the trainee for Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust, working at the Forest of Lowland. So far, I've been involved with organising events, plug planting, meadow surveying, site management, meetings with landowners and farmers, and then various other training opportunities. But anyway, on to Bowber Head. So the farm is situated just outside of the village Ravenstone Dale, close to Kirby Stephen, set in the Westmoreland Dales. That's the northwest of England, just situated east of Cumbria. And Bowber Head was gifted to Cumbria Wildlife Trust back in 2020, I believe. And our staff have since been working on Bowber Head to protect and restore these gorgeous upland hay meadows. But we will get onto this later. For now, a bit about the history. So the last owner of Bowber Head Farm noted that a Stone Age axe had been found on one of Bowber Head's fields. There was no date that specified the discovery of the axe, and the record is yet to be traced, but hut circles from the Stone Age had also been found. So although there's no direct evidence between the two, the axe head may have been from an early farming settlement on the site. In 1560, there had been the first mention in Ravenstonedale Manor records of a considerably large farm in Bleaflat, which is an area within Ravenstonedale village. And we think it was referring to Bowber Head. It was at that time rented by a Cuthbert Hunter. The farm was owned and rented by various people over the next few centuries. And then the first house at Bowber Head was thought to have been built in 1680. Later, during the early 1900s, the farm was sold for various reasons, and eventually, by 1940, was farmed by Raven Franklin. So, Raven. Raven Franklin was born in 1980. He came to own Pendragon Castle, Bowber Head Farm, and Piper Hall, of which 51 acres of his land was designated as natural and of scientific interest. He studied estate management at St John's College, Cambridge, and managed Bowber Head. He carried out the labour work and the repair work on the farm, from the dry stone walling, cutting and installing stone, the slate roofing. He did it all. He was what you call a stitch in time. He used traditional practices to retain valuable features within the landscape. And apparently he favoured oak to ash, which has frequently been used within his repairs, so you might see that more so in the barns. Raven later married Juliet Brown in 1959. Juliet was born in Surrey. She gained a first-class degree in botany in 1952 from the Royal Holloway College, University of London. She later specialised in the study of fungi and gained a PhD in 1957. Then worked as a mycologist at Millwood, where she met Raven. After marriage, Raven and Juliet lived at Bowber Head Farm, and Juliet continued her career in mycology. In the 1980s, she studied the effects of atmospheric pollution on fungi and on decomposition of leaf litter. She went on to publish over 70 scientific papers and books. She was elected a Fellow Linnaean Society in 1969 and became the president of the British Mycological Society in 1985. So quite the impressive lady. Raven later died in 1997, quite suddenly, and Juliet had to manage the estate. Her sister came to live with her to support her at Bowber Head, but she died 2 years later in 1999, suddenly too. Juliet then went on to suffer a stroke in 2008 and was moved to Stowbars Hall, a care home in Kirkby Stevens, where she died in 2013. Helga Franklin was Raven's sister. Helga took an interest in her brother's meadows. She worked as a regional officer for the Nature Conservancy when meadows were first scheduled. Helga at first studied chemistry and was in her first year at the University of St Andrews at the outbreak of World War II. So she came back to her father's farm to work as a land girl. This was when she came to realise the absolute importance of farming with nature, and her interest in conservation led her to abandon chemistry and become a biologist. After gaining her doctorate, she lectured in zoology, but came back to Ravenstonedale, this time to nurse her father into his last illness. When a post involving woodland management was advertised at Millwood Research Centre at Grange, she took it and then became the first Deputy Regional Officer for the Nature Conservancy Council in the north of England. And she worked on the creation of national nature reserves, the designation of sites of special scientific interest, and she became a founder member of Cumbria Wildlife Trust. Helga was Vice President of Cumbria Wildlife Trust and keen to ensure the long-term survival of the meadows. So she brought Raven's family and the trust together and sought to ensure the meadows were gifted to the trust. It took a long time to bring them together, to bring the wishes of Raven and Juliet's relatives together, But in March 2020, Bowber Head was finally gifted to Cumbria Wildlife Trust in lieu of inheritance tax, 5 years after Helga died. Helga and Juliet had shared their interests and the management of the meadows with members of staff at Cumbria Wildlife Trust before they passed on. So, during the time that Raven and Juliet Franklin farmed Bowber Head, the meadows became recognised as some of the very best hay meadows in northern England. They were scheduled as part of the Bowber Head and Piper Hole SSI in the 1980s and became part of the Northern England Hay Meadow Special Area of Conservation post 2000. So this means that the meadows are recognised as being of European significance. The farmhouse and 3 of the barns were also listed as being of historical interest. So we owe a big thanks to Raven and Juliet, early pioneers of meadow management. Without their careful stewardship, these meadows would not exist. And also a huge thank you to former Vice President Helga Franklin, whose vision and careful planning ensured her family considered the farm important and appropriate to give to Cumbria Wildlife Trust. And here I have a radio interview, with Raven Franklin, and he talks about how he managed the farm and the repairs he made, the history of the farm, and so on. I'll play a small snippet of the interview for you now, but if you want to check it out at a later point yourselves, and you can find it on that website there at the bottom of the PowerPoint. And the PowerPoint will be shared with you guys anyway, so you can check it out yourselves. But I'll just have a play of this now.
My travels this week have brought me to the eastern side of the county, to a lovely quiet corner of Cumbria that tends to be overlooked sometimes, about Ravenstonedale. Not actually in the village today, but we're up just above the village on the fells, and today I'm in the farmhouse of Raven Franklin. Raven, how long have you lived in this particular house?
I've been here 53 years now, and I was born 4.5 miles away, and my sister lives in our old family home. But I came here rather by chance, just because it happened to be for sale and it was cheap. And then I started farming, having bought it.
I believe your family have been local to this area for generations.
Yes, on my mother's side for very many generations, certainly well back into the 16th century, but unless people were very important, there aren't many records of them any earlier than that. And that's the case with us. It's legend rather than evidence, which we depend on to go back further than that. But I'm descended from the Fothergill family, which is alleged to have come over with the Conqueror, but there's no proper evidence of that.
Presentation now, and Claire can take over for you guys.
Thank you, Shannon. What a brilliant introduction to Bowber Head Farm. Such a beautiful place. And Cumbria Wildlife Trust is extremely grateful and lucky to have such a fantastic site. Anyway, this is quite an old photo of me. I'm the Grassland Conservation Officer at Cumbria Wildlife Trust. And like Shannon, I'm working on the Meadow Makers programme, which, as she said, has got an astonishing 51 hectares of restoration to do this year. And I think 8 of those fields are at Bowber Head, which we'll be working on. I've worked at the Wildlife Trust since 2005, and I've recently come back. I had 3 years over on the dark side working in the private sector, and I've run 4 hay meadow projects at CWT. I've also done all kinds of bits and bobs, other things to do with grasslands. I've just listed them there. But I'm very glad to be back, and it's great to be working on meadows again, and even better to be working at Bowber Head. Bowber Head, as we heard from Raven, and as we could see from Shannon's map, is a really typical upland farm in the eastern fells of Cumbria. It sits at almost 1,000 feet up in the valley of Ravenstonedale, and it's mostly meadows and pastures bounded by stone walls. Very, very traditional. And as Shannon was saying, Raven used to have all the gates made locally from local spruce and, as she was saying, oak up in a local wood mill in Dentdale. This is, if you manage to visit the farm, this is looking back at the farm from the first meadow. I've just slipped this map in as well. It just shows you the relationship of Bowber Head on the right to Piper Hole on the left as it sits in Ravenston Dale. Ravenston Dale is up in the north side of the map, and there's two becks that run northwest, southeast, and both farms sit slightly up from the beck. I think Bowber Head is slightly different. It's got more little limestone cliffs and escarpments between the meadows. There are also in the area, these aren't the only good meadows. These are the only ones that are designated, but at Lockholm Hall and Kilmire, there are also some absolutely fabulous hay meadows, and the Trust has been working for a number of years in the area, and we've worked around Rowfoot and other farms as well, restoring meadows. So the whole area is a really nice area to go and look at upland farming next to the fell and just enjoy some of these beautiful meadows. I said something on the film. I don't really think I need to repeat it, but I just took this photograph which shows the proximity of the meadows to the upland fell and just kind of reinforces how high up they are. We were saying when we were doing our filming that you can go one day and it will be absolutely roasting and you're getting bitten alive by horseflies, and in the afternoon it can be hailing. The weather changes very, very quickly, and generally it's described as cloudy, windy and cool, I think, which I think is sometimes it's a lot fiercer than that. Anyway, up there, that's how it feels. We're doing, although both these farms are designated as triple SIs, and they were designated in 1987, nearly all the fields at Bowber Head are what's called in favourable condition, which means they meet the criteria set by Natural England for upland hay meadows. However, when we've looked across the meadows doing our surveys, and the reserves team have had a look at them, we have felt that we don't have all the species in all the meadows. So there is a big restoration programme at Bowber Head, and as part of the Meadow Makers project, we will be working quite intensively at the farm this summer and autumn to put some of those species back in. This picture, incidentally, is Beckstone's meadow at Kilmire down the road. So you can see that's another stunning meadow. So what do we look for when we are thinking about restoring meadows? I'm sure this is one of the reasons a lot of people might have signed into this talk, because there's so much interest in restoring hay meadows at the moment. And I've written all of this down, really. Really, you're looking for soils with low fertility. So you're looking for phosphate, which is low. You're looking for a pH, which is it's just about below neutral, really. Anything for good grass and plant growth, 5.5 to 6.5. And one of the most important things, almost more important than both of those, is that the management is right for the foreseeable future. It takes quite a long time to restore a meadow, 6 to 10 years before you start to see real change. So the management needs to stay consistent and right for that meadow and your area and altitude for that length of time. Livestock are also useful. They just stop the meadow becoming too coarse, and the usual things you might expect. Not too many perennial weeds, a low percentage of competitive grasses and herbs, things like creeping buttercup and white clover and ryegrass, things like that. And one thing about these meadows, we're very lucky at Bowber Head to have so many good meadows next to each other. Sometimes we don't, so we have to bring in seed from elsewhere. And in that case, we have to find a matched donor site. So something from a similar altitude, similar soils, similar conditions. And that means that that seed will take much more easily on the receptor site. So we're really, really lucky at the Wildlife Trust. We have a fabulous team of botanical surveyors who will go out and do baseline surveys to see what's there. And after our restoration, they will go out and do monitoring surveys to see, so we can see in quite a lot of detail how the sward is changing through time. And this is just some, you can't really see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is some people undergoing training for botanical survey, some people doing botanical survey with the sailed quadrat. And in the left-hand slide, you can't really see, but there's two little tiny white dots in that far yellow field. And that's, it was Jonah Hunter and her colleague doing a detailed survey of that floodplain on the day we went to do our filming. So they're very, very dedicated. And that's exactly what they'll be doing, is counting forbs, counting grass, identifying everything. So this looks horrific, doesn't it? Can you imagine Natural England allowing us to do that to a SSSI? Well, they have granted us consent to do exactly this. And it looks horrific, but it's a very shallow ground cultivation of about 1 inch. And the grass grows back quite quickly afterwards. And what it does is, if you want to do a big pulse of restoration and you want to get a lot of seed in a short amount of time, we do what's called power harrowing. We remove the top surface, crunch it up, trundle it about, put it down again, and that gives, then we sow seed on that or put green hay on that, and it means it can establish before the grass starts to grow back over it. It's an established method of restoration. We are doing gentler methods as well at Bowber Head. We're just doing one meadow like this so we can get some of the easier species in. What we'll be using at Bowber Head, because we're using seed that is on site already, we will be collecting seed to move from a species rich field to a species poor field. And the method we'll use is to collect something called green hay, which is not hay at all, it's just grass. So the farmer will go in and cut the grass, chop it, bale it in net, and then it will be transported to the receptor field and spread out. We've done this, as you can see on the right hand slide, we've done this by hand at some sites. It's incredibly hard work. We had 12 people, I think, restoring just a small area, and it took quite a few hours. It's quite satisfying. So generally I tend to use something like this, a big forage harvester and a rear discharge muck spreader. So the species rich grass is cut, chopped, put into a muck spreader, taken to the receptor site and spread, and then rolled. And then we wait for things to germinate. And the first things through are things like the plantain, the clover, your buttercups, and then the other species might come in the spring, or they might come a bit later on. But it is a proven method of restoring meadows and enhancing grassland. The other thing we do, and Shannon talked about this a bit, is species which, particularly those which seed very late, where the seed ripens very late, we miss those when we do the green hay. So we do a fair, I say we, actually it's a royal we, it is our colleague Julia, who's the Assistant Grassland Conservation Officer. She is a very skilled grower of wildflowers using different methods, and she has been out collecting seed from things like melancholy thistle and the crane's bills, and also collecting roots from things like melancholy thistle, which takes very well from root cuttings. This, amongst the nettles, is actually globe flower, which occurs naturally at Lockholm Farm. So if they allow us, we might collect some seed from that and grow that on, which would be super to have at Bowber Head. It's very painstaking work, the seed collecting, ensuring that it stays ripe, it's not eaten by insects, sowing it, pricking it out. It takes days and days and days. And once we've grown the plug plants, of course, this is all done by hand. We then plant them at a rate of about 1,000 plants a hectare, which also takes a long time. We have some sterling volunteers who will help us plant stuff out. And this is Julia's office. She didn't mind me taking these photos. She has a selection of frames and cold frames and a tiny greenhouse and all kinds of things at Plum Garths. And she is very well set up to grow wildflower plants for us there. And that's what she's been doing through the summer. I think she started to collect seed last year from Bowber Head, and will be this summer as well, collecting things to grow on and then plant out. a bit later in the year or next spring. And they really do make a difference. It's an excellent thing to do if you want to introduce species to your meadow and your meadow's not too big. You can just do a few, say 100 a year or something, which sounds horrific, but actually you can make quite an impact if you plant them in clumps. And I'm just going to finish now with a few slides of sort of why we have meadows, why they're important. And I suppose the most important thing is they provide winter fodder for animals. This is a photograph that was submitted for a photographic competition by Julia, who has a farm in Brigsteer. And these are visiting Shetland cattle who are eating their own hay on the meadow. So seed will get back into the meadow that way. I think sometimes we forget in our joy of making these beautiful meadows that they do actually have a function in farming. The other thing is the species they support, apart from farming animals and flowers, is that onwards from that, there are many, many species that rely on hay meadows, or at least feed and nest and shelter in hay meadows. This is a fantastic picture of a ladybird in a black knapweed head, and some little birds here, which somebody is bound to tell me in the questions which they are. I think they're lapwing, but I'm not sure. But these, everywhere you go in Ravenston Dale, you can hear curlews and sometimes oyster catchers just all the time, just nesting in the long grass. And I've just got a few pictures of lovely meadows. This is Wygarth again in Kilmar Farm, Ravenston Dale. Absolutely stunning meadow. It's a county wildlife site. This coincidentally is Dash Farm. This is the farmer whose cattle graze our Icot Hill up in the north of the county. And he's also got some beautiful meadows near Bassenthwaite. And this was a photo that was sent in. This is near Helsington, I think. It was sent in for one of our photographic competitions that we run as part of the Hay Meadow projects. Anyway, I hope you have enjoyed that, and there's been enough information there for you to get your teeth into. I think now we're going to look at questions, are we, Shannon? See what we can.
Yeah, I think so. They look
chat.
more. They mostly look like questions that you'll be able to answer.
Oh, really? But I have to try and answer.
Do you want me to read some of them out?
Yes, go on then.
So there's a question from Helen, and she says, when planting out, do you want to plant in one clump, multiple clumps, or scattered throughout the field?
What I do, Helen, that is a really good question. And what we do at the Trust is we plant out in groups of about 12 plug plants. So we put them, and we imagine a circle about 2.5 meters across. We imagine a compass rose, and we plant a plug plant at the 8 points of the compass and about 4 in the middle of one species, and that just gives a relatively natural effect. We put canes out in the field so that they're scattered across the field, but we do plant in clumps. Yeah, our plug plants are quite big. They're 7 centimeters by 7 centimeters by 8 centimeters, which is enormous compared to the usual ones you'll find. And that's how we plant out. We just devise this method.
Cool. Rosemary has asked, would those species that are going to be introduced have been present in the past, and why did they disappear?
That's a good question. I don't know how far back our survey data will go. I would think that a lot of those meadows would have had most species in that you would expect of Upland Hay Meadows. So that's why we want to reintroduce them. And species can be lost for all kinds of reasons, just cutting early too often, or all kinds of reasons, really. It's down to management, really. If some fields are pastured for a while, you might lose species, especially things like yellow rattle and eyebright.
Cool. Janet has asked, what do we do with the cut hay at Bowber Head?
Now, I hope I get this right, because it's actually a nature reserve, which is managed by our reserves team. As far as I know, we have a tenant who farms Bowber Head, so I'm assuming he will cut that hay for his own use of stock on the farm, because there's barns and everything at Bowber Head, so I'm assuming the local tenant will reuse those barns, keep his hay there and feed his stock on Bowber Head. But that is a question we can clarify definitely at a later point.
Yeah. There's been a few questions from Helen and Sonia asking, when do we cut the meadows?
Good question. I'm glad you asked that question. That's a politician's answer. In general, I don't know the exact schedule, cutting schedule for Bowber Head, but in general, for this kind of area, Natural England would ask for a species-rich meadow that is cut. The earliest would be mid-July, and there are some meadows, I know of one in Autumn, which isn't cut until the 4th of August, and they really, really benefit from a late cut in terms of the flowers, because so many more species get a chance to set seed. So things like knapweed can really spread across the field because it gets a chance to seed and spread.
Another question from Helen. She's asking, would a lowland wildflower hay meadow be managed much differently? And if so, how would someone go about creating such a meadow?
How to create a meadow like that, Helen, is too big a question to answer here. But basically, it would be managed the same way. Meadows are basically pasture grassland where the grazing is withdrawn through the summer to let the plants flower and set seed. So from a conservation point of view, we get flowers and insects and birds, and from a farming point of view, we get hay. I can't go into the full thing about how to create a meadow, but basically you probably need to introduce seed of some kind somehow, but it's worth just managing it in a low input system for a few years and just seeing what happens and what pops up. You might have more in there than you think.
There's quite a lengthy question from Elisa. Lisa's put, how would we be able to find out if any advisors would be available? We have had land that we are looking at turning into hay meadows. We already have a good selection of wildflowers. We have 10 acres we would like to use for this. Are there any grants available?
Do you mean Natural England advisors?
I think that's what they're asking for. Any meadow advisors, I believe. That's what they're asking about.
That's what they're asking for. I think you'd have to go onto the I don't even know if there's such a thing as a Natural England website anymore.
Oh.
Or gov.uk to find out who your local advisor would be and talk to them about whether you could then do meadow creation within a agro-environment scheme. I think that's what you're asking.
There's a question from Louise. Is Bowber Head open to the public? Which
it is at the moment. It's open until the 11th of July, I believe. Other than that, I don't think there's any footpaths across it, are there, Shannon? Across Bowber Head?
No. There's a few public footpaths that walk alongside, or you can walk along the road and you can see the meadows from the public footpaths or the road, but we won't have them going through the meadows.
So if you want to see it before it's cut, come before next weekend. There are public footpaths through Piper Hole, the sister farm, just slightly lower down in the valley, but they only go across 2 fields.
Mm-hmm. Is there a group within Cumbria Wildlife Trust for volunteers or interested members?
There's definitely, if you would like to volunteer with Cumbria Wildlife Trust, then please contact us just using the info at or inquiry form on the website. So we have volunteers doing all kinds of things Cumbria Wildlife Trust, including restoring meadows and doing botanical surveys, but all our reserves team use volunteers, all kinds of things. Come and join us.
There's one question here saying that when they visited another hay meadow recently, it was dominated by tall grasses and less wildflowers. Is this indicative of a different type of hay meadow or different management regime, or is this just strange weather?
Any of the above, I would say. If your meadow isn't grazed and just cut, you can get a lot of tall grasses like cocksfoot and false oak grass. So that might be one reason. It might be the strange weather. I picked a creeping buttercup leaf that was as big as my hand this year, just because we'd had no rain, and then we had masses of rain and it just grew like topsy. Difficult to answer that one without seeing the meadow, really. I just wanted to answer one from somebody about fog. I think it was Roger. Roger used to talk about the fog. Now, the fog, as far as I understand, is the regrowth after you've taken the hay cut. And that's what the cattle graze on after the hay has been cut. The farmers talk about the fog. So that's when the field greens up again once the hay's been cut. I don't know about it not cutting too close to the soil. I just understand it as being the regrowth, but I'm from Middlesex, I don't have... I am learning, but I don't have a fantastic grasp of Cumbrian idiom. But I think that's what it means, the regrowth after the hay cut.
Sue asked, you mentioned sheep grazing at the start. Could you use cattle? If not, why not?
Yes, you can use cattle. And actually, the kind of experiments have shown that the best results are from using cattle for the aftermath grazing of the fog, because they've got bigger feet. They make more divots in the ground. So that's more germination niches for seeds to get into. So you can use either or both.
I don't know how well you know your butterflies, but do you know? No, I will bypass that question.
Sorry, I can't help with butterflies. Isn't that
No.
terrible? Well, I do. Oh, chimney sweep, but that's a moth. I know they're very common in meadows.
There's a question about tree planting. Do you reckon you might be able to have a go at that one? It's how will all the tree planting on Ravenstonedale Common affect Bowber Head as the trees get established?
Not sure how to answer that.
No.
Sorry. I'm not sure how to answer that one.
Is there a contact email for meadow advice at all on Cumbria Wildlife Trust? I don't think I know of one.
I guess to go inquiries at Cumbria Wildlife Trust will get through to me or Tanya or Graham or David. Yeah, if you use the contact form on the website, it will get through to one of the meadow people, definitely.
Perfect. I think that's all the questions that I can see here. Unless you have anything else to add, then I think that's that.
That's it. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope it was interesting and inspiring, and you got a little flavour of Ravenstonedale and our new reserve, Bowber Head.
I think that we have been told to mention that if you want to come volunteer with us, then information will be sent to you via email after this is finished, along with a recording of the presentation. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Bye.